I think in the last couple of weeks I have spoken about this, but honestly, trying to be very precise about the quantitative impact of either the tariff or the GST is definitely fraught with a wide margin of uncertainty. It's very easy to give you the direct impact. That is, most people have done, looking at, for example, on the tariff side, looking at the export to the US, it's shared in the overall exports, it's shared in the GDP, and you make some assumptions about the elasticity of demand, and because the price goes up for the importer, and therefore, what will be the reduction, potential reduction in the exports, and what percentage of that, what percentage of GDP is that, and then you subtract that number, you get some estimate. Although you must remember that for the first 5 months of the current financial year, exports to the US have almost already achieved, exports of goods have already achieved half the number of last year. So in other words, in this financial year, the impact may be relatively limited depending on the assumptions one makes. But the more important thing is the second and the third round effects of the uncertainty of tariff, provided they last longer, and I hope they don't, because I've always said in the last couple of weeks that my hope is that the tariff situation turns out to be transient and short-lived rather than long-lived. But in the event that it is slightly longer than we want it to be, lasts longer than we want it to be, the basic, especially the penal tariff of 25%, then the second and third round effects will become more pronounced, which is the uncertainty with respect to investments, capital formation, overall sentiment in the economy. But that is where the GST reforms will play a very good offsetting role. Because by substituting domestic demand for whatever the export demand that may not materialize from the United States, what GST reform does is to alleviate the second and third round effects by creating domestic demand and therefore removing the uncertainty which will come in the way of capital formation. So the GST's contribution is again not just in the direct impact in terms of its purchasing power it places in the hands of the people by bringing down the prices of goods, which of course the private sector has to pass on. But more importantly, what it does is to provide an antidote to the second and third round uncertainty effects. So net-net, I think if you take the GST into consideration, the impact of tariffs and the GST, the compensating effects of GST rate reductions and process reform could probably give us a 0.2 to 0.3% on a net basis in terms of drag on the GDP estimates that we have of 6.3 to 6.8 for the current financial year. And in the next financial year, it's very difficult to say, and I hope we don't have to discuss tariff uncertainties for the next financial year. And by then, I hope it would have become part of history.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share, and subscribe.